Welcome to our Bible study. It's an honor to have you. Thanks so much for joining in. This is our third installment in our wisdom series, and we have been studying from the book of Proverbs. So I hope you took the time to read Proverbs chapter 5. We've completed chapters 1 through 4. And if you missed any of these studies that we've previously completed, you can go onto our YouTube channel and you can rewatch that content. As well, if you didn't take a moment to subscribe, why not hit the subscribe button on the bottom of the page? Maybe it's on the bottom of this side of the page. I'm not sure. But why not click that button as well as click the share button and send this stream to those on Facebook, on WhatsApp. Get it to your family members and friends so that they can be part of our study tonight. So we are studying from Proverbs chapter 5, and specifically tonight we will be studying the topic of adultery. Yes, adultery. Now, this is a very prevalent topic to speak on right now because of some information that has recently come to light in a public forum. And I haven't chosen to speak about adultery right now because of that. However, based on how we've been studying from the book of Proverbs, this is where it has led us. And I believe that God's timing is ideal as we tackle this topic of adultery. Now, by definition, adultery is an act sexually between a married person and someone that is not their spouse. I wanted to start by that definition. Let's get clarity there as we get into our study. Didn't want to take it for granted. And we're studying from Proverbs, and we know that the author of majority of the book of Proverbs is King Solomon, one who is known as the wisest man to ever live. And he gives some good words of wisdom, some profound words of wisdom in chapter 5 to guide us along, to help us in this topic of adultery. But more specifically, what's quite interesting is that Solomon is the product, or he is the offspring of a relationship that started in adultery. Now, he isn't the child that was born from an adulterous relationship. His father was David, King David, the second king to rule over Israel, but the first king that was really chosen by God. And he committed an act of adultery with Bathsheba, Bathsheba being Solomon's mother. Now, we all know about this because this is known as the great fall of a mighty man, King David. And Bathsheba, we know the story would go that one day he was on his rooftop when he should have been out in war, King David, and he saw Bathsheba taking a bath on her roof. And he saw and he lusted. Now, I want to start off there as we talk about adultery, because the Bible says that David saw her. And I will go one step further. Jesus says in the New Testament, if a man only looks upon a woman in lust, he has already committed the act of adultery. And this is a very key principle. I know we haven't gotten into the book of Proverbs as yet, but I want to talk on this principle just for a little. Right? The window to our soul is our eyes. And before we ever commit any act, the thought is processed in our minds before the action is carried out by our body. So more importantly than controlling our body and our urges is controlling our thoughts. Romans says that we should be not conformed to the things of this world, but let our mind be transformed by God's word. And when David stood that day and saw Bathsheba, he allowed his mind to go to a place where he lived a fantasy before acting on an urge that was built on the inside. And I want to start talking about this aspect of fantasy. Because when it comes to adultery, no one just wakes up one morning and decide, well, today I'm going to commit adultery. No, it doesn't happen like that. It's a process of over time allowing thoughts to play out in your mind and living through sexual fantasies that eventually become an urge and a desire on the inside. So, I want to say tonight that it's more crucial to guard your mind, than to be focused on what you do. Because, here's why. If you can guard your mind, then what you do will align to what's in your mind, right? So in this case of David, he saw her, he allowed that thought, that process to go through his mind. I want this woman, I'm enticed by this woman, and then he committed the act of adultery with her. And if we can guard our mind, we'll go a long way in terms of keeping ourselves away from adultery. And adultery applies for those that are married, of course. However, if you intend to get married, if you're dating, or even if you're single and you would like to get married, these words of wisdom would be very helpful to you in this study that we're doing right now. So the first thing that we're talking about a little bit tonight is guarding your mind, guarding your thoughts. And sometimes we think that we can live in fantasies because we're not actually doing something. We're not actually committing the act. So we can live out these fantasies. We're not hurting anyone. I'm not hurting anyone. It's in my mind. I'm not actually doing it. And when Jesus says that if you look and you lust, you already commit adultery. Of course, if you look, you haven't already committed adultery, okay? Now, I'm not saying that Jesus is wrong, but here's what I'm saying, right? I'm saying that, yes, when you look, you didn't actually do the act. That's correct, you didn't do the act. However, from the time you've already looked and lust and let your mind go through that process of thinking about it, then you're already too far gone. You understand what I'm saying? You're already too far gone. You're already at a place where it's too late. That's why Jesus said, if you look and lust, you already have committed adultery. Because as soon as you start lusting and you start allowing these thoughts and these fantasies to go through your mind, the only next thing is to commit the act. And when you already live out the fantasies and you don't stop that thought process, you think to yourself that you can't control yourself. So it's easier to control the thought than it is to stop an action. Because when you've already gone through the thoughts, it's already imprinted into this body. Now this body wants to act on those things. So what am I saying? I'm saying that we need to stop the trend of thought. From the time that thought comes into our mind, from the time that desire slips in, from the time we look, we must look away. From the time we glance, we must look away. If David, in that moment when he saw Bathsheba, he looked away, he walked away, and he took his mind and placed it on God. He took his mind and played the harp and spent some time in song and worship unto God. His mind would not have been in a place where he would have been led to commit this act. So Solomon, he's not the son of an adulterous relationship in terms of being the son that was birthed from Bathsheba and David's adulterous relationship. That son died. However, he was the son of David and Bathsheba after they had gotten married. So I believe that for Solomon, when he puts pen to paper in the book of Proverbs, he is speaking from a place where he saw what happened to his father David, and he doesn't want this to happen to anyone else. Solomon never committed adultery. Now, he had many wives, all right? The Bible says he had 300 wives and over 700 concubines. He had many wives, and this was his downfall, inevitably, as we would have discussed in our previous study. However, he never committed adultery. Each one of these women were women that he married that did not have a husband at that time. He didn't commit adultery. So he did learn from his father's mistakes, and he wants us as well to learn from it as well. In the Bible, we would see a lot of biblical characters that would have committed adultery. We know David to be one of them. In the New Testament as well, I was wondering if there are any characters that would have committed adultery. There aren't any major characters like any of the disciples or the apostles, the early apostles. However, in 1 Corinthians, Paul does speak to the Corinthian church about adultery that was something that was happening at that time. So adultery is an Old Testament issue, it's a New Testament issue, and I can tell you for sure, it's a 21st century issue. If I say the name right now, Ravi Zacharias, or if I say the name Carl Lentz, what would you think of? Would you think of Ravi Zacharias, famous apologetics that shaped Christianity in our new world? When I say Carl Lentz, would you think Hillsong, New York City, pastor that brought so many people that were far away from relationship with God into relationship with God? Or will you think men that were recently exposed and their careers were ruined because of adulterous relationships? So I say that to say that adultery is a common issue that has plagued from the beginning of time and is still a relevant issue right now. And if we guard our hearts well, if we guard our minds well, and if we follow the words of instructions that we're about to read in Proverbs, it will help us in this process to avoid the pitfall of adultery. So let's get into Proverbs. I know you've been waiting to jump into Proverbs chapter 5. So let's get into Proverbs chapter 5, beginning at verse 1. So Proverbs chapter 5, beginning at verse 1. And what we would do a verse by verse study tonight. So we'll go by one verse at a time. We'll go verse by verse, and we'll pick out and pull from that words of wisdom. So let's start in verse 1. It says, "My son, be attentive to my wisdom. Incline your ear to my understanding." Now, this is quite interesting because if you recall, Proverbs chapter 1, Proverbs chapter 2, Proverbs chapter 3, Proverbs chapter 4, all of them start very similar to Proverbs chapter 5. Even if you continue on reading in 6 and 7, they start very similar. How does it start? It starts by giving a warning or alarm saying, please pay attention. It starts, "My son, be attentive to my wisdom. Incline your ear to my understanding, that you may keep discretion and your lips may guard knowledge." And as much as we keep speaking about knowledge, we keep speaking around this thing that knowledge must be received. You can't ignore it. Or you can, however, you should not ignore it. And this is where Solomon starts this chapter by saying, please pay attention. Please pay attention. Please pay attention. Please don't ignore these words of wisdom. And he continues in verse 3. This is where we get into this topic of adultery. He says, "The lips of a forbidden woman drip honey, and her speech is smoother than oil." Now, Solomon is very lyrical in his writing, right? We know the Songs of Solomon. Those chapters are very compact with romantic literature, right? So he's very good. I'm not so good at putting pen to paper and getting all these lyrics down, but he's very good. He's very good at using his metaphors and his similes and all these different analogies, right? What he says here is the lips of a forbidden woman, and he speaks now about a woman that is not your wife, that will try to get you to commit adultery. Now, this applies both to men and women, but in context here, this verse speaks about a woman. And it says, "For her lips are forbidden," right? "And they drip of honey, and her speech is smoother than oil." So we see two things here. We see, firstly, this forbidden woman, she is physically attractive. This woman, she drips of honey. And then her speech is smoother than oil. So she would try to lure you with her physical attraction, and secondly, with her words. Her speech is smoother than oil. She's able to sway you with words of affirmation, with all this sweet talk, tell you all these nice things, trick you and deceive you, like Delilah would have deceived Samson. She kept nagging him, "Samson, tell me where your strength is, tell me where your strength is." And he was none the wiser. He was strong, but he wasn't wise. And you could be strong, but that doesn't make you wise, right? And he gave away his secret and his hair, which was his hair. And because of that, he lost his strength. So we could see here that her physical attraction is one thing. Sorry about that, my hair is giving him a little trouble here, right? Her physical attraction is one thing, and then her ability to use her words is a tool that she uses. So this speaks of two things that we need to guard against, right? When it comes to adultery, we need to guard against what we see and what we hear, right? So you may say, well, I'm just having a conversation. But that conversation could be very dangerous, very, very dangerous. So it's important that you set boundaries. It's important that you set boundaries, especially with your conversations. Those late night messages, those things will only pose problems. Those long conversations getting into deep emotional aspects. I believe that certain aspects of counseling should be kept between those of the same sex, right? You shouldn't be spending 2-3 hours counseling someone of the opposite sex, especially about their relationship issues, right? Those are things that leads to much problems. Let's continue to verse 4. It says, "But in the end, she is bitter as wormwood. This is an interesting phrase, okay? Because wormwood is a type of tree. However, when we see the word wormwood in the Bible, it often refers to the end times or the apocalypse or the end of the world, right? So Solomon is saying that she is dripping of honey, she is smoother than oil, but in the end, she is bitter than wormwood. Every adulterous relationship ends in a place of wormwood. And by wormwood, we mean destruction, pain, hurt, strife, all the things that you don't want for your life. That is what an adulterous relationship ends with. For David, he lost his son and he mourned for days. He rent his garment in pain because the child that was birthed out of his relationship, his firstborn, out of the relationship with Bathsheba, with the adulterous relationship, died. And that brought so much immense pain. He was even publicly accused by a prophet for being a king that took from a man that had less, in such that he took Uriah's wife, Bathsheba, when he had so much already. All right. So in the end, it is bitter. It is bitter as woman. I want to sing that in, right? Because for us to keep ourselves, we must have the end in mind. We must have a vision of the end in mind. Okay? If we don't see a vision of the end in mind, if we don't have that in the back of our minds, if we don't keep that vision in the back of our head, then it's easy to think that it would be something else from what it really would be. What do I mean by that? The end of this adulterous relationship, as the Bible tells us here, as Solomon tells us here, is wormwood, extreme pain, apocalyptic type pain, right? It's bitter. There's no joy in it. Your family would be destroyed. Your home will fall apart. And we'll get into that some more in this passage, actually. We'll see some more about that. So it is very, very important that we keep that end product in mind. We understand that while I might gain temporary pleasure, all right, that will fade away. The relationship might last a few months, might last a few years. Eventually, what is hidden will come to light. And eventually, it will lead to a place of immense bitterness, pain, destruction. Your entire world will just fall apart. It will just fall to pieces, right? So in the end, it's like wormwood, sharp as a two-edged sword. A two-edged sword cuts in every direction. You can't avoid the pain. You can't avoid the outcome. Either way you turn is going to be cutting you up, right? So verse 5, it says, her feet go down to death. Her steps follow the path to Sheol. And Sheol is a reference to hell. And we know that not only is adultery detrimental to the family life, detrimental to our society, detrimental to your emotional health and your physical well-being. However, it is also a sin against God. Adultery is forbidden in the Bible. It's a sin against God. And this is why it says, her steps follow the path to Sheol. You follow this woman that is luring you into this adulterous relationship, and you don't make a change, you don't turn around, you don't repent and make things right. The end path where she's taking you is to hell, Sheol, right? Sheol is a reference to hell, another word for hell. Verse 6, she does not ponder the path of life, her ways wander and she does not know it. This speaks about the mindset of an adulterous woman, right? So we're not talking about the adulterer. We're talking about that woman or that man that is not your spouse, that is trying to lure you into this adulterous relationship. This person is not innocent by any means. You know, sometimes I hear people say, well, the person who is the adulteress, or the person who is not the spouse outside of the marriage, they were innocent. They maybe didn't know, or they were deceived, or something to that extent, right? And they tend to put a heavier blame on the person that is married. However, both persons are responsible in this adulterous relationship. Both persons, all right? And the person that is in a relationship with someone that is married, that person oftentimes is lost and directionless. That's why verse 6 says, she does not ponder the path of life. You know, she doesn't This person doesn't really have a vision for their life. They don't have goals set out. They don't. They always wander. They're going. They're going in all directions. They don't really know what they really want in life, and she just doesn't know. And yes, to some extent, yeah, it's easy to take advantage of someone like that. However, that person as well is just as responsible in this relationship, this adulterous relationship. All right. So that just gives us a little bit more context into the mindset of the person that is not in the marriage, but the outside person, the outside woman, the outside man. Verse 7. And now, O sons, listen to me, and do not depart from my mouth. Keep your ways far from her, far from her. Keep your ways far from her, and do not go near the door of her house. Do not go near the door of her house. In other words, if you play with fire, you're going to get burned, right? Don't go near. Stay far away. One text message is too much. One Facebook request, friending on Facebook, following on Instagram, following on TikTok, that's one too many, right? Just stay far away. Don't go near. Don't go near at all. Right? Pass the house straight. Go take a different direction. Flee. Right? Flee like Joseph. Run from Potiphar's house. Even if it take you to prison, it's better to stay in prison. All right, in a place of physical torture, right? To stay in a place of prison than to commit an act of adultery, right? So flee from it. Flee from it. Verse 9, lest you give your honor to others and your years to the merciless. Lest strangers take their fill of your strength and your labors go to the house of foreigners. I want to speak a little bit more about this, right? From verse 9. It says, lest you give your honor to others and your years to the merciless. What this speaks about here is the destruction that comes from an adulterous relationship. All right? When you commit adultery, you destroy your home. You destroy your reputation. You destroy your honor. You destroy everything that you worked and labored for. All right? This is why it says, lest strangers take their fill of your strength and your labor goes to the house of a foreigner. That's verse 10. Sometimes you might, in an adulterous relationship, it leads to divorce. Your wife takes the house and land, and then she marries someone else. And now that person enjoys all that you labored for, the house that you built. All right? This is what it's saying here, right? And then in verse 9, it says, you give your honor to others and the years to the merciless. Because now, when you should have been someone with a good reputation that people look up to, you lose that honor. Nobody respects you anymore, and now you become just like those that would have steal and murder and committed all these other things that in society place them in a perception that they were, in other words, merciless. Not good standing people in society, not people of good reputation. Verse 11. And at the end of your life, you groan when your flesh and body are consumed. Means that after all is done, after you've given to all these desires of the flesh, you come to a place now at the end of your life where you just live in regret. If I didn't do this, if I didn't commit adultery, if I'd made different choices, I would have enjoyed my family. I would have enjoyed seeing my kids grow older, because in these kind of relationships, your kids stop talking to you. They don't want to have to do anything with you anymore. You don't get to see your grandchildren grow up. All these different things because of how that wormwood, that destruction that comes out of this adulterous relationship. And we mentioned the names Ravi Zacharias and Pastor Carl Lenz earlier in our study tonight. And their life examples, or what is happening right now, will bringing to life these verses that we are reading. Because in the case of Ravi Zacharias, he passed away. And after passing away, last year he passed away, I believe, and now they are now discovering all the allegations of sexual misconduct, right? And now what that is doing is destroying his legacy and is destroying all that he would have worked for while he was alive. So when his legacy could have been carried on and the ministry that he built could have continued to impact so many different people, instead now it's losing its impact. Not only is it losing its impact, but the people that were blessed by his decades of ministry are even questioning what they would have received from him in terms of ministry. Now they're questioning it. Now they are a little bit confused. they're wondering, if this same man who they trusted and they received so much sound doctrine from, they received so much clarity on scripture from, and now to hear that he has all these sexual allegations that have data to support it, could they really believe all that was done by him? All right, this is what it leads to. This is the byproduct. And even in the case of Pastor Carl Lenz, he would have lost his pastoral position at Hillsong Church, and now he's in a place where he is trying to recover from the damage that would have been done to his family, his reputation, and the ministry that he had. Now he's no longer a pastor. Now the church has been handed over to someone else, and as well, all the people whose lives he would have touched and impacted, they are probably in a place where they're a little bit lost and wondering. So please, the negative consequences definitely significantly outweighs any pleasure that could be felt or received in the moment in an adulterous relationship, right? Verse 12, and you say, how I hated discipline and my heart despised reproof. Now this is very important, right? I want to speak on these 2 points here. When it comes to an adulterous relationship, or when it comes to sexual misconduct, 2 things that you will regret. And instead of regretting later on in life, let's learn from it now so that we don't have to live in regret later on. 2 things. How I hated discipline. Someone who finds themselves in an adulterous relationship is someone that hates discipline, someone that doesn't like correction, someone that when they're told you're doing the wrong thing, hey, stop talking to this person, hey, stop going out with this person, hey, this is going to lead down a bad path. They ignore the discipline, right? Hey, spend more time with your family, spend more time with your relationship, build it some more, add value to it, do what is necessary. No, they ignore that discipline. And then secondly, they despise reproof. Their heart despise reproof. And reproof is similar to discipline, right? Discipline is setting you in a different direction. Reproof is when you've already made those mistakes, say now to yourself, don't do it again, right? So discipline is ensuring not to go down that direction. Reproof is you've already done it, but now you need to retract and not do it again. Don't do it again. Don't do it again. This one act can't be a habit. It can't be continual. So those 2 things, discipline and reproof, is very important for the health of your relationship and for you to guard your heart so that you don't commit adultery. Let's go into verse 13. I did not listen to the voice of my teachers or incline my ears to my instructors. Hey, accountability, looking up, having those in leadership over you is very, very important to ensure that your heart is kept safe from an adulterous relationship. So if you live your life as in, I can do whatever I want, I don't have anybody to listen to, nobody tells me what to do, that is a very dangerous place to live from. You must have people that you respect, that has some kind of authority over you. I'm not saying that you're being controlled by someone, but someone whose advice and counsel you will listen to. And this is why the Bible or Solomon uses the word of a teacher, because a teacher is someone that you should subject yourself to in terms of their authority and their words of wisdom that they would pass on to you. So he says, I did not listen to the voice of my teachers or incline my ear to my instructors. Verse 14, I am the brink of utter ruin in the assembled congregation. I am at the brink of utter ruin in the assembled congregation. Verse 15, drink water from your own cistern, flowing water from your own well. Now this is interesting here, right? And this is actually solid advice, right? Drink water from your own cistern. A cistern is a bowl or a jar, right? So he's saying drink water from your jar, right? Flowing water from your own well. In other words, you need to be satisfied in your relationship. This is why Paul comes back to say in 1 Corinthians, when they had adultery that was plaguing the Corinthian church, he came back to say to that church, he wrote and said, let each husband have sexual intercourse with his own wife. All right? You drink water from your own jar. If you drink water from your own jar, then your thirst will be quenched and you won't want water from someone else's jar. Okay? So I would hear this analogy is used oftentimes. If you just eat a full meal at home, right? And then you go out to a buffet. You won't want anything to eat anymore because your appetite has been filled. Your stomach is full. So you won't have that desire. You won't have that temptation of all the nice smelling food won't affect you. And this is the same thing here that Solomon is saying. He's saying to drink from your own water, your own cistern, flowing water from your own well. Now, in times of old and around Israel, there's a lot of desert land. And in verse 15, it speaks about flowing water from your own well, because usually each family would have their own family well that water from that well would be for that specific family alone. And if you took water from someone else's well, that was considered a crime in this time, right? It was not only considered a crime, but it was considered hazardous. Here's why. You could have, for one, if you were evil-minded, you could have poisoned that person's well, that family's well. So when they drink from that water, they would die. Or you could contaminate it as well. If you take if you use a jar that isn't sanitized and you dip water from their well, you could contaminate their well. So when you when you share wells, you also share all the problems that one well has with the other well. In other words, this is where we come down to now. Adultery opens the door for STDs. You know, it opens the door for contamination, not only in the physical realm. We have sexually transferred disease. In the spiritual realm, right? Because we also have demonic strongholds that are attached to sex. And we have the emotional realm, how much damage that does to your spouse and to your kids. So yeah, you definitely could contaminate your well. You definitely could bring things outside of your home into your home and cause destruction. This is why he's saying drink from your own well, right? And when you don't drink from your own well, this is how bad it gets when you choose to be hard-headed and don't take reproof, don't follow instructions. Let's go to verse 16. It says, should your springs be scattered abroad, streams of water in the streets, let them be for yourself alone and not for strangers with you. And this comes back to this topic of the well, and it comes back to what we're speaking just now about in terms of disease and contamination and how that defiles your home, right? Keep it guarded, guard your home, guard your family. Verse 17, let them be for yourself alone and not for strangers with you. Verse 18, let your fountain be blessed and rejoice in the wife of your youth. So here he just says it out plainly after using all these analogies. Rejoice in the wife of your youth, right? Be satisfied by your woman, your wife. Rejoice in her, right? Which verse we're in? We're in verse 18. Let the fountain be blessed and rejoice in the wife of your youth. Verse 19. A lovely deer, a graceful doe, let her breast fill you at all times with delight. Be intoxicated always in her love. I think that is pretty literal and self-explanatory, right? Here you have it, guys. Words of wisdom from Solomon. Key to a healthy relationship. Key to avoiding adultery. Key to avoiding that pitfall. Let's read it over. Let your fountain be blessed and rejoice in the wife of your youth. A lovely deer, a graceful doe, let her breasts fill you at all times with delight. Be intoxicated always in her love. Verse 20. Why should you be intoxicated, my son, with a forbidden woman, and embrace the bosom of an adulteress? For a man's ways are before the eyes of the Lord. Always remember that. You might be able to hide some things from people, hide some things from your pastor, hide some things from your leaders, hide some things from your wife, hide some things from your parents. You may be able to hide some things from your kids. But the Lord's eyes are to and fro. A man's ways are before the Lord's eyes, and he ponders all his paths. God sees every single thing. Nothing is hidden from God. Verse 22. The iniquities of the wicked ensnare him, and he is held fast in the cords of his sin. Verse 23, our last verse. He dies for lack of discipline, and because of his great folly, he is led astray. That really sums up everything, that last verse there. Adultery leads to your emotional, physical, financial debt, right? Spiritual debt. Why? Because of lack of discipline. And we started off by speaking about discipline the mind. Discipline the mind. It's very, very important to discipline the mind, because it's in disciplining the mind that we come to a place where we avoid ourselves from letting thoughts move to our heart, where they contaminate our soul and then becomes actions that damage our homes, damage our reputation, damage what we work for, damage what we build, damage our legacy. Let's learn from the wisdom of Solomon. Let's learn from the Bible characters that would have made the wrong decision, like David, that would have made the wrong decision, and that caused so much pain and hurt. Let's learn even from those that we see around us right now in this 21st century, like we would have mentioned Ravi Zacharias, Carl Lentz, and there are others that would have fallen into this pitfall. And when you listen to these individuals, I read Carl Lentz's statement, and I totally agree with what he would have said in terms of, he spoke just like what Solomon would have said here. He spoke about the fact that he didn't discipline himself. He became burnt out. He wasn't feeding himself spiritually. And that led him to a place where he fell into this relationship. He committed adultery, and he hurt his family, he hurt his church, he hurt all these people, and he was sorry for it. And now he was in a place of regret. It's better to make the right decisions now than to live in regret later down. So make the right decisions now. From our Bible study tonight, you've got a lot of good content, men and women. Please, women, don't say this is a man issue. This is men alone have this problem. This is something that affects both genders. For women, I know that the allure at times may be more of a conversation than a physical attraction, even though it tends to both applies to both men and women. But typically, we would say that men tend to be more allured by the physical attraction, women by the conversation that could be held, right? By the words that is able to sway them away. Both are mentioned here in the book of Proverbs. It speaks of a woman. She's dripping with honey, physical attraction, and her words are smooth, which speaks of conversation. Both we must guard ourselves against. I know that when we speak about sexual perversion, we have so many things that play factors besides from just simply outside men and women in our relationships, but we have the content that we view, the content that we listen to, right? These things affect our mind. Remember, we spoke a lot about God and the mind. So the shows that we look at, right? Especially for our ladies, these shows, they claim to be romance, but when you look at the content, they're teaching you adultery. They're teaching you they're teaching you sex before marriage. They're teaching you one night sexual intercourse. All these different things that is not biblical. And then men as well too. Yeah, for sure. The content that you take in, it builds up the lust on the inside, the longing, and it feeds the flesh, right? And a lot of times we try to fight the urges of the flesh with our flesh. We try to restrain our flesh by using our abilities. But the Bible clearly tells us that this body is at war. The flesh and the spirit man is always at war. And the part of you that you feed is the part that will grow. So if you feed the flesh would be strong. If you feed the spirit will be strong. In other words, the content that you take in will either feed the flesh or it will feed the spirit. So what you look at and what you listen to will either feed the flesh, and if it feeds the flesh, it will strengthen the appetites of the flesh, or it could feed the spirit. If it feeds the spirit, it will fuel the strength of your spirit that will be able to overcome the appetites of your flesh. So some food for thought, a lot of words to digest, a lot of content to digest. If you missed out on any part, you can rewatch it. And of course, if you have any questions, you can send it in the comments and I would answer them as soon as possible. So I hope that you were blessed with our wisdom series. We continue with our wisdom series. Our next session will continue on from chapter 6 in the book of Proverbs. So continue reading your book of Proverbs. Study to show yourself approved, and we'll glean some more from God's word and from all the wonderful instructions that is written in it to help us in our lives. I love Proverbs. It's very practical, instructions that we could use, instructions that we can definitely live by. So the only way for God's word to make a difference in your life is for you to apply it. So please apply the wisdom, as Solomon started off in each chapter by saying, hear the instructions, my son. Sons and daughters, hear the instructions of Solomon and let it guide your life. So stay good, keep good, and we'll see you again very soon. God bless.